Have you ever felt like you're living in a world that's moving too fast for its own good? Where everyone seems to have instant opinions about everything, but nobody wants to sit with the uncomfortable questions that don't have easy answers? There's something profoundly disturbing about watching society celebrate the loudest voices while ignoring the most thoughtful ones. But here's what's really happening beneath the surface. There's a silent revolution taking place. Not the kind with protests and banners, but something far more subtle and powerful. It's happening in the minds of people who refuse to accept simple answers to complex questions. People who see patterns where others see chaos. People who ask why when everyone else is satisfied with what. These are the deep thinkers, and they're not just misunderstood. They're actively feared by the very society that desperately needs them. Think about your own experience for a moment. When was the last time you tried to have a meaningful conversation about something that really mattered to you? Maybe it was about the nature of consciousness, the ethics of artificial intelligence, or why certain social structures persist despite causing obvious harm. What happened? Did you watch as eyes glazed over? Did people suddenly remember they had somewhere else to be? You probably walked away feeling frustrated, maybe even questioning whether your thoughts were worth sharing at all. But here's what you need to understand. That reaction wasn't about you being boring or pretentious. It was about something much deeper and more primitive. The human brain's instinctive resistance to cognitive complexity. This resistance isn't accidental. It's been shaped by millions of years of evolution, refined by thousands of years of social conditioning, and amplified by decades of modern media consumption. Understanding this resistance is the key to understanding why deep thinkers have always been society's outsiders, and why that's actually a good thing. Let me tell you about something psychologists call the cognitive load theory. Every human brain has a limited capacity for processing information. When we encounter ideas that are too complex, too nuanced, or too far removed from our existing understanding, our mental circuits literally start to overload. The brain's response? Shut down the input, reject the complexity, return to familiar, comfortable patterns of thinking. This isn't stupidity, it's survival. For most of human history, the ability to make quick decisions based on limited information was the difference between life and death. Our ancestors didn't have the luxury of pondering the philosophical implications of their choices. They needed to decide: fight or flight, friend or foe, safe or dangerous. The ones who survived were those who could process information quickly and act decisively. But here's where it gets interesting. We're no longer living in that world, yet our brains still operate like we are. We're trying to navigate the most complex civilization in human history, with mental software designed for much simpler times. This creates a fundamental mismatch between what our brains are designed to handle and what our world actually requires. Deep thinkers instinctively understand this mismatch. They see the complexity that others miss, the connections that others ignore, the consequences that others can't imagine. But this gift comes with a price: isolation from a society that isn't equipped to appreciate or even understand what they're offering. Consider what happens in a typical social interaction. Most people engage in what researchers call social grooming, conversations designed not to exchange information, but to reinforce social bonds. Topics are kept light, opinions are kept safe, and complexity is avoided at all costs. It's not about truth or understanding, it's about belonging. But deep thinkers approach conversation differently. They're seeking genuine exchange of ideas, authentic exploration of concepts, real grappling with difficult questions. When they bring this energy to a social setting designed for grooming, the mismatch is immediate and uncomfortable. They're not just violating social norms, they're challenging the very purpose of the interaction. This explains why deep thinkers often feel like they're speaking a different language, even when using the same words as everyone else. They are speaking a different language, the language of complexity in a world fluent only in simplicity. But this linguistic barrier goes deeper than individual conversations. It shapes entire institutions, from education systems that reward memorization over understanding, to media outlets that prioritize clicks over accuracy, to political systems that favor slogans over solutions. Let's examine how this plays out in education. We tell students we want them to think critically, to question assumptions, to develop original ideas. But what we actually reward is very different. The student who memorizes the textbook gets an A. The student who challenges the textbook gets labeled as disruptive. The student who asks uncomfortable questions about the curriculum gets sent to the principal's office. This isn't because teachers are malicious. It's because the entire system is designed around efficiency, not depth. With 30 students in a classroom and standardized tests to prepare for, there's no time for the kind of exploration that deep thinking requires. The system needs predictable inputs and measurable outputs. Deep thinking is neither predictable nor easily measurable. The same pattern repeats in the workplace. Companies claim they want innovation, creativity, and out-of-the-box thinking. But when an employee actually proposes something genuinely innovative, something that would require rethinking established processes or challenging accepted wisdom, what happens? The idea gets buried in committees, lost in bureaucracy, or simply ignored until someone else implements it years later. This institutional resistance to depth creates what I call the shallow society syndrome. It's a condition where surface-level thinking becomes not just acceptable, but preferred, where nuance is seen as indecision, complexity as confusion, and deep analysis as overthinking. In such a society, the people who think most clearly about important issues find themselves increasingly marginalized, not because they're wrong, but because they're inconvenient. Their insights threaten comfortable assumptions. Their questions challenge established authorities. Their very existence implies that everyone else isn't thinking hard enough. This marginalization has been going on for centuries. Every generation has its deep thinkers, and every generation finds ways to dismiss, discredit, or simply ignore them. Only in hindsight, sometimes decades or centuries later, do we recognize their contributions and celebrate their wisdom. Take Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician who discovered in 1847 that hand-washing dramatically reduced mortality rates in maternity wards. His data was undeniable. When doctors washed their hands with chlorinated lime, deaths from childbed fever dropped from 18% to less than 2%. But instead of being celebrated, he was ridiculed by the medical establishment. His ideas were so threatening to existing medical authority that he was eventually dismissed from his hospital position and suffered a nervous breakdown. He died in 1865, never seeing his ideas accepted. It wasn't until Louis Pasteur's work on germ theory decades later that Semmelweis was vindicated. Or consider Barbara McClintock, a geneticist whose groundbreaking research on genetic regulation was so far ahead of its time that it was dismissed by the scientific community for decades. She discovered that genes could move within chromosomes, a concept so revolutionary that her peers called it impossible. She was marginalized, her funding was cut, and she was essentially exiled from mainstream science. It wasn't until the 1970s, 30 years after her initial discoveries, that molecular biology caught up with her insights. She eventually won the Nobel Prize in 1983, but only after spending decades as an outcast in her own field. These stories reveal a disturbing pattern. Society doesn't just fail to recognize deep thinking, it actively punishes it. The deeper the insight, the more threatening it becomes to existing power structures, established beliefs, and comfortable assumptions. But why is deep thinking so threatening? The answer lies in understanding what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the discomfort we feel when presented with information that contradicts our existing beliefs. The more fundamental the contradiction, the more intense the discomfort. And deep thinkers, by their very nature, tend to uncover the most fundamental contradictions in how we understand the world. When someone points out that our cherished beliefs might be wrong, our first instinct isn't to examine the evidence. It's to attack the messenger. This is why throughout history, deep thinkers have been labeled as heretics, dissidents, troublemakers, or simply crazy. It's easier to dismiss the person than to grapple with the uncomfortable possibility that they might be right. Modern neuroscience has revealed exactly what happens in our brains during these encounters. When we're confronted with ideas that challenge our core beliefs, the amygdala, our brain's alarm system, floods our system with stress hormones. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational analysis, actually decreases in activity. We literally become less capable of thinking clearly precisely when clear thinking is most needed. This neurological response explains why facts and logic often fail to change minds. The more threatening an idea is to our worldview, the more our brain's defense mechanisms kick in to protect us from it. This is why deep thinkers often feel like they're shouting into the void, because in a very real sense, they are. Their audience's brains are actively working to not hear what they're saying. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. While individual brains resist complexity, human civilization as a whole has gradually become more complex over time. How do we explain this paradox? How does a species that instinctively resists deep thinking continue to advance? Intellectually, the answer lies in understanding the difference between the majority and the minority. While most people resist complexity, a small percentage of individuals in every generation are naturally drawn to it. These are the deep thinkers, and they serve as civilization's scouts, exploring intellectual territories that others aren't ready to enter. This minority doesn't just think differently. They think ahead. They see patterns before they become obvious, identify problems before they become crises, and develop solutions before anyone realizes solutions are needed. They're not just smart, they're temporally displaced, living intellectually in the future while everyone else remains in the present. This temporal displacement explains why deep thinkers so often feel like aliens in their own time. They're seeing version 2.0 of reality, while everyone else is still running version 1.0. Their insights seem bizarre, not because they're wrong, but because they're premature. Consider the environmental movement. Scientists like Rachel Carson were warning about ecological destruction in the 1960s, decades before climate change became a mainstream concern. They were dismissed as alarmists, their warnings ignored or ridiculed. Only now, as the predictions they made 50 years ago are coming true, are we beginning to appreciate the depth of their insight? Or think about the early warnings about social media's impact on mental health. Researchers were identifying these problems in the early 2000s, long before they became widely acknowledged. They were labeled as technology pessimists, out of touch with the digital revolution. Now, 20 years later, their concerns have proven prophetic. This pattern, deep thinkers identifying problems early, being dismissed or ignored, then eventually being vindicated, repeats throughout history. It suggests that deep thinking isn't just valuable in hindsight. It's essential for navigating an increasingly complex world. But if deep thinking is so valuable, why does society continue to resist it? Part of the answer lies in understanding the different timescales involved. Deep thinkers operate on long-term timescales, thinking about consequences that might not manifest for years or decades. Most people, however, are focused on immediate concerns. Next week's deadline, next month's bills, next year's election. This temporal mismatch creates a fundamental communication barrier. When a deep thinker warns about long-term consequences, they're asking people to care about abstract future problems while ignoring concrete present concerns. From the perspective of someone living paycheck to paycheck, this can seem not just irrelevant, but almost insulting. The tragedy is that this short-term focus, while understandable at the individual level, creates massive blind spots at the societal level. We become excellent at solving immediate problems while remaining oblivious to the systemic issues that create those problems in the first place. Deep thinkers see the systems. They see how individual problems are connected, how short-term solutions often create long-term complications, how the root causes of today's crises were planted by yesterday's solutions. But communicating this systems-level understanding to people focused on immediate concerns is like trying to describe a symphony to someone who can only hear individual notes. This is why deep thinkers often feel frustrated by political discourse, media coverage, and even casual conversations. They're seeing the forest while everyone else is focused on individual trees. They're thinking about underlying causes while everyone else is treating symptoms. They're considering long-term consequences while everyone else is focused on immediate effects. But here's what deep thinkers need to understand. This frustration, while natural, can become counterproductive if it leads to arrogance or dismissiveness. The fact that you can see patterns others miss doesn't make you better than others. It makes you different. And difference, no matter how valuable, needs to be communicated with humility and patience. The most effective deep thinkers throughout history have learned to translate their insights into language that others can understand. They've found ways to make complex ideas accessible, to connect abstract concepts to concrete experiences, to build bridges between their understanding and others' comprehension. Einstein, for example, was famous for his ability to explain complex physics concepts using simple analogies. He understood that being right wasn't enough. He needed to be understood. This required not just intellectual brilliance, but emotional intelligence and communication skills. Similarly, writers like Carl Sagan made astronomy and cosmology accessible to millions of people by connecting scientific concepts to human experiences and emotions. They didn't dumb down their ideas. They found ways to make them relevant to people who weren't scientists. This translation skill is crucial for modern deep thinkers. In an age of information overload and decreasing attention spans, the ability to communicate complexity simply has become more important than ever. Not because people are becoming less intelligent, but because they're becoming more selective about where they invest their cognitive resources. Everyone's brain is constantly being bombarded with information, demands for attention, and competing priorities. In this environment, complexity doesn't just seem difficult, it seems expensive. People have to choose where to spend their limited mental energy, and most choose to spend it on immediate, practical concerns rather than abstract, theoretical ones. Understanding this reality is key to bridging the gap between deep thinkers and the broader society. It's not that people don't value deep thinking, it's that they need to see how deep thinking connects to their immediate concerns and interests. This brings us to one of the most important insights about deep thinking. It's not just an intellectual exercise, it's a form of service. Deep thinkers serve as early warning systems for society, identifying problems before they become crises, spotting opportunities before they become obvious, and developing solutions before they're urgently needed. But like any service, deep thinking only creates value when it's delivered effectively. The most brilliant insights in the world are worthless if they remain trapped in the mind of someone who can't or won't communicate them to others. This is why the loneliness that many deep thinkers experience isn't just a personal problem, it's a societal one. When deep thinkers become isolated, society loses access to the insights it needs to navigate complexity. When deep thinkers become frustrated and withdraw, everyone suffers. The solution isn't for deep thinkers to become shallow, or for shallow thinkers to become deep. The solution is to build better bridges between different levels of thinking. We need translators who can take complex insights and make them accessible. We need institutions that value depth alongside efficiency. We need social norms that make space for complexity alongside simplicity. Most importantly, we need to recognize that in an increasingly complex world, the ability to think deeply isn't just a nice-to-have luxury. It's a survival skill. The challenges we face as a species, from climate change to artificial intelligence to global inequality, can't be solved with shallow thinking. They require the kind of deep systems-level analysis that makes many people uncomfortable. This means that the deep thinkers who feel isolated and misunderstood today aren't just struggling with a personal challenge. They're wrestling with one of the most important problems of our time. How do we create a society that can handle the complexity of the modern world? The answer isn't to make everyone think deeply. That's neither possible nor necessary. But we do need to create space for deep thinkers to contribute their insights, and we need to develop better ways of translating those insights into action. For deep thinkers reading this, understand that your struggle isn't evidence of failure. It's evidence of value. Your ability to see what others miss, to think beyond conventional boundaries, to grapple with complexity that others avoid. These aren't burdens to be endured, but gifts to be shared. Yes, it can be lonely. Yes, it can be frustrating, but it's also profoundly important. Every major advance in human understanding has come from someone who was willing to think more deeply than those around them. Every solution to a complex problem has emerged from someone who refused to accept simple answers to complicated questions. Your thinking isn't too deep. The world's thinking is too shallow. Your questions aren't too complex. The world's answers are too simple. Your insights aren't too advanced. The world's readiness is too limited. But readiness can change. Understanding can grow. Complexity can become familiar. The ideas that seem impossible today often become inevitable tomorrow. Your job isn't to wait for the world to catch up to your thinking. It's to keep thinking, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep finding ways to share what you discover. The silent revolution isn't coming. It's already here. It's happening in every mind that refuses to accept easy answers, every conversation that goes beneath the surface, every moment when someone chooses depth over shallowness. You're not just witnessing this revolution, you're leading it. And that's not just important, it's essential. Because in a world of increasing complexity, the future belongs not to those who think fastest, but to those who think deepest. The challenges ahead will require the kind of insight that can only come from minds willing to grapple with complexity, sit with uncertainty, and explore the depths that others fear to examine. Your deep thinking isn't a burden. It's exactly what the world needs. The question isn't whether deep thinking matters. It's whether you'll find the courage to keep sharing it, even when others don't seem ready to receive it. Because ready or not, the world needs what you have to offer. And someday, perhaps sooner than you think, it will be ready to listen.